In July 2005, 3 Pakistani guides found a body on the Diamir face of Nanga Parbat at 4,300 meters, 1 hour above base camp. The boots were still laced. The jacket was intact. A Himalayan glacier moves at roughly 25 centimeters a day. It doesn't stop. It doesn't lose what it carries. It just moves, sealed and slow, until the ice thins and the mountain gives something back. This body had been inside that machine for 35 years. The man who walked off that mountain in 1970 looked nothing like what the glacier had kept. Reinhold Messner stumbled out of the Diamir Valley in severe frostbite, barely conscious, his feet destroyed. He lost 7 toes. The glacier lost nothing. It held his brother intact, boots still laced, jacket still closed, while the survivor spent 35 years being accused of killing him. What it was about to prove would end one of the longest, most bitter disputes in mountaineering history. If you want to follow more forensic breakdowns of the mountains and the people who don't come home, subscribe and ring the bell now. To understand why, you have to go back to 1970, to the climb where everything started. On June 27, 1970, Reinhold and Günther Messner reached the summit of Nanga Parbat via the Rupal Face, the highest mountain wall on Earth. They summited around 5 p.m., already dangerously late. Reinhold shouted down to teammates far below, asking for help getting Günther off the technical Rupal descent. Nobody heard him. They bivouacked near the summit. By the next morning, Günther was too sick to safely reverse the Rupal route. No rope, deteriorating condition, a 4,500-meter vertical face below him. Reinhold made the decision to descend the opposite side of the mountain, the Diamir Face, which was less steep and technically simpler. He went ahead to scout the route. When he came back, Günther was gone. There was fresh avalanche debris where his brother had been standing. Reinhold shouted his name into the wreckage for hours. He found nothing. He stumbled out of the mountains days later in severe frostbite, and he never stopped being interrogated about what had actually happened up there. In June 1970, Reinhold had walked off Nanga Parbat alone, with severe frostbite, and his brother somewhere behind him on the mountain. In the years that followed, 4 members of the original 18-person expedition, Gerhard Bauer, Hans Saller, Jürgen Winkler, and Max von Kienlen, eventually broke their silence. Their version was specific and damaging. Reinhold had pre-planned a solo traverse of Nanga Parbat, they claimed, and had deliberately separated from Günther near the summit to achieve it, leaving his younger brother to die so that the traverse would be his alone. Saller was direct about it. Von Kienlen framed it as defending the honor of expedition members who could no longer speak for themselves. At least 6 of the original 18 were already dead. The dispute produced more than 12 lawsuits. In 2003, Saller published a book. Von Kienlen published another. Reinhold published his own account in response. Outside magazine called it the most extraordinary fight in modern climbing history. And through all of it, Reinhold's position didn't change. Günther was swept by an avalanche on the Diamir descent. The proof was inside the glacier. To understand why that mattered, you have to understand what a glacier actually does. A glacier is not a static body of ice. It's a slow river moving downhill under gravity, typically around 25 centimeters per day for mountain glaciers, though some Himalayan glaciers move several meters per day. The upper section of a glacier is the accumulation zone, where snowfall exceeds melt and the glacier gains mass. The lower section is the ablation zone, where melt exceeds accumulation and the ice surface is exposed. Anything deposited in the accumulation zone, whether it's a crevasse fall, an avalanche burial, or a climber who never came home, gets picked up by that conveyor and transported downward, slowly, over years, over decades. The preservation inside that ice is extraordinary. Cold temperatures and the absence of oxygen stop biological decomposition almost entirely. Bodies emerge from glaciers after 30, 40, 50 years in conditions that still allow DNA identification. Clothing intact, personal effects intact. The ice holds what it takes. Reinhold knew this. He knew Günther was somewhere inside the Diamir Glacier, traveling toward the ablation zone at 25 centimeters a day. The question was whether the glacier would move fast enough for the evidence to surface before the accusations buried him completely. The glacier was moving the whole time. But when the mountain finally spoke in 2005, the evidence didn't just confirm Reinhold's story. It created a forensic anomaly that his accusers would try to use against him one last time. On July 17, 2005, 3 Pakistani guides found human remains at approximately 4,300 meters on the Diamir face of Nanga Parbat, 1 hour above base camp. On exactly the side of the mountain Reinhold had always described. He traveled to the site, he identified his brother's shoes, he identified his jacket, he took tissue samples, and on September 8, 2005, he had the remaining bones burned at the foot of the mountain in a ceremony borrowing from Tibetan tradition. Then he waited for the science. On October 21, 2005, scientists at the University of Innsbruck completed DNA analysis of those tissue samples. The confirmation was unambiguous. The body was Günther Messner. The published study noted that the location of the remains supported Reinhold's version, putting to rest one of the climbing community's most publicized controversies. 35 years of accusation had just been answered by physics and ice. But the glacier didn't just confirm who the body was, it confirmed where Günther died, and that distinction mattered more than anything else in the dispute. Here's how the forensic calculation works. Glaciologists know the Diamir Glacier's flow rate. They know the 35-year transport window between Günther's death and the body's emergence. They know the emergence point at 4,300 meters. Working backward from those 3 variables, they can estimate where the body entered the ice. That estimated entry point was consistent with the location on the lower Diamir face, where Reinhold said Günther was swept by the avalanche. The glacier had carried him downward for 35 years and deposited him exactly where the physics said he should be. Saller didn't accept it. His residual argument was specific. The body emerged too high, he claimed. If Günther had died lower on the face, where Reinhold described 35 years of glacial movement should have carried him further down before emergence. The body's position at 4,300 meters suggested a higher point of death, which would be inconsistent with Reinhold's account of the final moments. It was a glacier science argument deployed as a legal one. The answer to it lies in the specific accumulation and ablation dynamics of that section of the Diamir Glacier. Flow rates aren't uniform across a glacier's surface. Burial depth affects transport time. The local geometry of the ice in that section produces, over 35 years, exactly the emergence point where the body was found. The math answers Sailor's objection directly. Then, in June 2022, the glacier released something else. Pakistani climbers found a boot on the Diamir Glacier, a second boot, belonging to Günther, 52 years after his death. Its location was further down the glacier than where the body had surfaced in 2005, consistent with glacier transport. The boot and the body had been on slightly different trajectories through the ice, and the boot was still traveling when the body had already emerged. A Pakistani climber named Liver Khan traveled to South Tyrol to return it to Reinhold personally. Reinhold was 80 years old. The Ötzi case sets the outer boundary of what this process can mean. A Neolithic man died in the Alps approximately 5,300 years ago. In 1991, hikers found him emerging from the Similon Glacier. Food was still in his stomach. His equipment was partially intact. A flint arrowhead was lodged in his left shoulder, evidence of a murder. The glacier had preserved not just his body, but the forensic circumstances of his death across 53 centuries. What the glacier takes, it eventually returns. The only variable is time, and the glacier does not negotiate that timeline with anyone. Not every mountain has a Diamir Glacier running down its face. Some mountains don't have a conveyor at all. They have avalanche zones, vertical faces, and geometry that works entirely against return. The bodies that go into those mountains don't travel toward emergence. They stay. Wanda Rutkiewicz was the most accomplished female high-altitude climber of her generation. First European woman to summit Everest. First woman to summit K2 without supplemental oxygen. By May 1992, she had 8 8,000-meter peaks complete and was on Kangchenjunga, the 3rd highest mountain on Earth, attempting her 9th. She called the project the Caravan to Dreams. Carlos Carsolio climbed with her that day. He reached the summit. She didn't. On his descent, at approximately 8,300 meters, he found her sheltering in a snow cave, physically weakened, deciding to wait and try for the summit the following morning. He tried to convince her to descend with him. He was himself depleted. He left her there. It was May 12th. She was 49. Nobody saw her again. Kangchenjunga's upper reaches are vast enough that a body anywhere on the mountain is essentially unfindable without knowing exactly where to look. 3 years passed. No news. Then, in April 1995, an Italian team found a woman's body at 7,700 meters. Yellow down suit, location consistent with a fall from near the summit. The clothing matched what Rutkiewicz had been wearing. 3 years of ambiguous grief looked like it was finally closing. Then someone checked the jacket pocket. The medication inside had Bulgarian lettering. The body wasn't Rutkiewicz. It was Jordanka Dimitrova, a Bulgarian climber who had disappeared from the same mountain in autumn 1994. The identification had been wrong. One family's near closure became another family's dislocation, and Rutkiewicz remained missing. She still is. Her body has never been found. Whether she summited Kangchenjunga, whether she became the first woman to reach the top of the world's 3 highest mountains, cannot be answered. The mountain has held that fact for 33 years and shows no indication of returning it. The Nardi and Ballard case is a different kind of non-return, not ambiguity, certainty without the ability to act on it. Daniele Nardi, Italian, 42. Tom Ballard, British, 30. The son of Alison Hargreaves, who had herself died on K2 in 1995. They were attempting the Mummery Rib on Nanga Parbat in February 2019, a route up the center of the Diamir face that had never been completed in winter. Their last communication came on February 24th. An avalanche was heard miles away. A rescue team led by Alex Chikon reached Camp 2 before Serac Falls and avalanche activity stopped any higher access. A drone was deployed from Camp 2 and lost in an avalanche. Pakistani airspace closed for military reasons, delaying helicopters. On March 7th, Texicon moved away from the Mummery Spur and looked back at it from a different angle, midway between Base Camp and Camp 1. Through a high-powered telescope, he could see 2 shapes. He photographed them. On March 9th, the Italian ambassador confirmed the identifications from the photo, with family permission to release the image. Nardi was visible by his orange vest. Ballard was seated nearby in blue. The rescue team noted that retrieving the bodies before the next winter season wouldn't be possible. They weren't retrieved the following winter either. The photograph remains the last image of both men. The families had certainty. They had a photograph. They knew exactly where on the mountain their people were. They couldn't reach them. That is a distinct and specific kind of grief, not the open ambiguity of Rutkiewicz, but the closed, locked reality of visual confirmation with no mechanism for what comes next. Annapurna makes this permanent by design. 75 deaths, a fatality rate that has run as high as 32% historically, approximately 39 of those deaths caused by avalanches. When an avalanche sweeps a climber on Annapurna's south face, the debris compacts almost immediately into what one account describes as a concrete tomb. The body is buried under meters of ice in an active avalanche zone, in a location that shifts with every subsequent slide. Recovery isn't dangerous, it's physically impossible. Most of those bodies aren't traveling toward emergence on a glacial conveyor. They're in avalanche debris on faces that will never deposit them anywhere a family can reach. The glacier doesn't wait for families to be ready. It moves at 25 centimeters a day, and right now, it's moving faster than it ever has. Swiss glaciers lost approximately 2% of their volume every year in the decade ending 2022. The ablation zones are expanding downward and outward. Ice that would have stayed frozen for another 20 years is now exposed. What that means, practically, is that the queue of bodies inside these glaciers is discharging ahead of schedule, releasing evidence into a world that has already tried to move on. In 2022, a boot belonging to a German climber who disappeared near Zermatt in 1986 emerged from a glacier, 36 years after the death. The same year, a Piper aircraft that crashed on the Great Aletsch Glacier in 1968 surfaced approximately 5 kilometers downstream from where it went down, 54 years after impact. Glaciologist Guillaume Jouvet published a mathematical model of its trajectory through the ice, tracking the exact path it had traveled beneath the surface. Run that model backward from the emergence point, and it tells you where the object entered the glacier. This is the same calculation, in broad form, that answered the forensic argument about where Günther Messner died. The math doesn't change, only the object does. Aung Tshering Sherpa, former president of the Nepal Mountaineering Association, was direct about what accelerating melt means for the Himalayas. Bodies buried for decades are now becoming exposed. Old ones, from the 1950s and 1960s, are coming out. The families receiving them may be in their 80s. Some of those families are already gone, replaced by children and grandchildren who never knew the person at all. A body emerging from a Himalayan glacier in 2040 from someone who died in 1973 is not the same event for the same family. It is a different event for a different generation, and nobody has a system for that. In April 2025, 2 Sherpas killed by an avalanche above Camp 2 on Annapurna were located only because their clothing contained Reco reflectors. The signal guided searchers to the crevasse where the debris had carried them. Without those reflectors, their location would have been unknown. The concrete tomb would have stayed sealed. The reflectors didn't make recovery easy. They made it possible at all, which is a different thing. The glacier's clock is geological. It doesn't run on grief cycles, or legal deadlines, or the human need for an event to be finished. It runs on ice flow and temperature, and the slow physics of mass moving downhill. Reinhold Messner understood this better than anyone. He said it plainly in 2003, when the accusations were at their loudest, and the books were in print, and the lawsuits were stacking up. It might take 10 years, it might take 30, but the glacier was the only witness that could settle it, and he was willing to wait. He waited 35 years for the body. Then, 52 years for a boot the Diamir Glacier is still moving. 25 centimeters a day, indifferent to everything that happened above it. Reinhold spent 35 years holding a truth that physics eventually proved for him. Not witnesses, not lawyers, ice. If you want to understand the other mountains that still haven't given anything back, watch this next. Subscribe and ring the bell for more forensic breakdowns of the mountains and the people who don't come home.